Hey, this is David Aldersveld coming at you with week 7 of Power BI's Workout Wednesday Challenge. This week is about conditional formatting with the matrix visual in Power BI. There's many different visuals that allow for conditional formatting, but we have a special case where we want to look at how we can enhance data that might just be, kind of very blandly presented in a table or a matrix and kind of jazz that up a bit. And one of the ways to easily do that in Power BI is through the use of conditional formatting. And if you're going to try to replicate the solution this week, there's a set of requirements that are geared toward the visual aspect of it. And then when it comes to a little bit of data preparation, if you want to get the raw data, which I'll show you here in a second, there's going to be an aspect of small transformation of the data and small cleaning up of the data to be able to get it into a format that works well with the matrix here. And I'll step through the requirements and then try to build this out. But the basic idea is the main visual we're going to try to cover for this challenge is this matrix here on the right-hand side. And Power BI has 5 different types of conditional formatting that you can add for a matrix. There's a background color, which you can see with the different shades of blues. There's a font color where you can see some variation between, in this case, black and white. And then it has icons. So there's some ability to add different types of icons, more for KPIs and things that would be uh, better served in report level visualizations that you might build. But for this special case for today, we're just going to throw a star on when it has 100%. And there are 2 others that are not being used for this challenge. There's something called data bars, which is kind of like a bar chart embedded within the different columns here, and then something called a web URL, which if you had the ability to say, I want to just go out to a website and look at Lake Erie or Lake Huron or what have you, and have kind of data-driven labels or data-driven hyperlinks rather for these labels, that could be added as well. But the main focus for today is going to be the background color, the font color, and then the special star with which is the icon here when we have 100% coverage. So what's this data set? What are we doing? We're actually going to be looking at the Great Lakes. So it's winter here in Michigan. We're going to be looking at ice coverage on all 5 of the Great Lakes. And to do that, we have a data set that is coming from NOAA, and they have a Great Lakes environmental research laboratory that publishes information on the maximum ice coverage, as well as a lot of other data around ice coverage on the Great Lakes. We're going to be taking this and finding a specific transformation within Power Query that will allow us to reshape this data to a format that'll work better. We're then going to be taking that and creating the matrix visual that I just showed you. And it's only going to be a 3-column data set. So very, very simple. The main focus this week is going to be on the visual that you're building itself rather than on a very complex data model or what have you. But we're just going to be dropping it in just like a pivot table in Excel, saying, here are my rows, here are my columns, here's my value, and those are the 3 that we've got. Do a bit of basic formatting that is not conditional formatting. These are the static format options that you have with different types of visuals in Power BI. Do a bit of filtering. One of the things that you'll see is that the data set includes all lakes as a total, and we'll be filtering that out. And then it gets into the fun stuff with regard to the conditional formatting itself. So I talked about the background color, the font color, and the icons earlier. And we'll get into some of the ability to customize different rules around conditional formatting in Power BI and hopefully just showcase some of the power that you could have over the customizations that you could build. So you're not just stuck with the defaults, which is this color scale option that I reference here. We're actually going to be building out a more robust rule set that will get us the visualization that I've added for the challenge. And then up to your discretion if you want to add some supporting visuals around the matrix. This can help just kind of flesh out your report and provide some supporting information on the side, as well as if you want to cross filter from one chart to another chart within Power BI. Easy way to do that without adding slicers or adding filters is having this other visuals where you can just say click on information in one chart and it will filter information on another chart. That's one of the key selling points of Power BI is the ability to cross-filter visuals here, just providing more interactivity. So those are the requirements. Do them the best you can. I'll step through here in a second, but to start, I'm going to get the data. And scrolling down here, I put the data out on data.world. And this is something where if you're able to leverage Power BI's native data.world connector, this would be preferred. If you don't have access or don't want access to data.world, it is available on GitHub in Excel format, and then you could just use Power BI's native Excel connector to bring the information in as well. And say you don't want to do any of that aspect, you just want to get to the matrix visual and do your thing for this week. There is a copy of a Power BI desktop file, the PBIX file, that is already loaded for you, so you can just skip ahead if that's what you want to do. But for right now, I'm going to start with a clean slate, and I'm going to skip over to Power BI. I've got the Power BI December version here. So this would work really with any version recently, but for my particular version, if you see certain things that you might not have in your version, it's because I'm working off of December. But I'm going to go and get data here from data.world, and I can see the connector. It's still listed as beta. It's one of those things. It'll probably be beta forever. Who knows? But the owner is going to be DataVeld. And then I'm going to flip over to my browser to get the data set ID. So let me find that quickly here. Oh, sorry. So that is WOW2021 week 7. If this is the first time that you are working with data.world, it might ask you to authenticate. But for this particular portion here, I've got a data set ID. I don't need to put in a query, and I don't need to authenticate because I've already connected my Power BI desktop to data.world. Once again, if this is the first time you've done this, you may be asked to authenticate to data.world from Power BI. But I can see here, because I've already done that, I have access to this data that's here. And I mentioned that we need to transform the data. So I have different columns here from NOAA that have, or NOAA, NOAA, that have the different columns for all the different lakes, and then I have this all lakes, which is a total. And what I want to do is, instead of hitting load, hit transform data. This will allow me to reshape the data. And there's a special kind of transformation we need in the requirements that will allow us to reshape it here so that I end up with 3 columns. And if you are familiar with the unpivot capability within Power BI, you can highlight different columns and right click and choose to unpivot those columns. Alternatively, in this case, it might be worthwhile just to focus in on year, and knowing that I need to unpivot all the other columns. In this case, one of the viable ways to transform that data as well would be to select year and then unpivot other columns. But regardless of the method that you use, you now end up with 3 different columns here: year, attribute, and value. And I'm just going to do some very quick renaming here. I'm just going to make year uppercase. I'm going to rename this to lake and rename value to coverage for ice coverage. And ice coverage will range from 0, so there's no ice on the lake, to 100, where it's completely frozen over. And then additional things I'll want to do here. I know that I'm going to be filtering out all lakes, so I'm not going to pay too close attention to that underscore, but I do want to capitalize the names of the lakes. So one of the cool transformations here in Power BI, I can right click on lake, and under transform, I can say capitalize each word. So it just takes, Superior, for instance, Michigan, so on and so forth, and just capitalizes that. And at this point, I think I'm in good shape. With year, I might shift this over to whole number, instead of decimal. Coverage, looks like I'm good there. If I miss anything on the data prep, I'll revisit this. But for close and apply, I click this here, and now it's going to load this data into my data model within Power BI Desktop. And the main thing I want to do, if I shift over to look at the version that's already built here off to the side that I'm replicating. The main thing that I want to do again is build out this matrix. And to do that, I'll click on this to show you, but rows, columns, and values. I need to simply drag year to rows, columns will be lake, and then values will be covered. So let's do that here and click on matrix. That's this visual within the visualizations pane. Give myself a little bit more space, and then I'll start with coverage. So I'll drag that to values, and I can then put in the columns as lake, and I can see that that splits that out as columns, and then year I'll put on rows. And two things I'm going to do right away. I'm going to sort this by year, descending. So I want my 2020 data to show up on top. So I click on the column header, and then it gets that sort right for me. And then I want to get rid of all lakes. And this is kind of up to your discretion. You could have done this in Power Query. I'm going to do it here as a filter. It's not a very big data model, so it's not that big of a performance hit if you load all lakes in. But people have opinions about where certain things are done in Power BI, and if you're just learning Power BI, let those battles be fought in the future for you. So for right now, I'm just going to say lake, and I'll say here's a filter on all pages. I'll select all, but then I'm going to deselect all lakes. So now that all lakes column is gone, and I'm left with the 5 major Great Lakes that I care about for my data. And then for the requirements, I need to go in and I need to change some of the major format options. And there are not many for this particular visual, but the main one is I need to get rid of the subtotals for rows and columns. And I simply select the matrix visual, and then I click on the format paint roller. And I really like search. There's a lot of different options, and it's this kind of accordion style expand collapse type of control. It's very cumbersome if you're just getting used to Power BI and don't know where something's at. Search is awesome because now I can come in and just start searching for total, and I could say, here's row subtotals, let's toggle that off. Here's column subtotals, let's toggle those off, and now I'm left with just the core data in my matrix that I want. The other thing I want to do here is under the grid option, I want to increase the font size. So I'll come in here and just bump this size up a bit to make it a little bit more readable for everyone. I'll maybe even minimize this filters pane, and then here's my core matrix. All right, so here's where the fun stuff starts for this challenge, the conditional formatting of this matrix. And what I need to do is come back to my fields area, and under the field well for values, I have coverage, and this is also in format options. Once again, there's many different ways to do this. I can do it here under conditional formatting. For whatever reason, I've always kind of taken to this little arrow here, and this is the way that I've always approached conditional formatting, but there's many different ways to do it. I guess at least 2 different ways to do it. But you can see here the 5 available options: background color, font color, and then icons will be the 3 that we care about for this particular challenge. And if you look at the requirements, what we want to do is not use this color scale that's a default. I'm going to hit OK just so you can see what this looks like, and then I'll revert back. But this is just a gradient color scale, and it's auto-calculated for you. So you have some customization around it, but it's not what we want for this particular set of requirements. So in this case, instead, what I'm going to do is change this format by to rules. And then I'm simply going to add a very quick set of rules here to say when it's greater than or equal to 0 as a number and less than 25, it's just going to be a very light color blue. And then I'll simply add a new rule when it's greater than or equal to 25 and then less than 50. We'll do the next color blue, new rule, greater than 50, greater than or equal to 50, and then less than 75. Next color blue, and you can use any colors you want, but I have a little bit of a trick when it comes to accessibility and contrast when we add our font color. So I'm intentionally coming in here and choosing this color scale that I'm familiar with. or that is built into the Power BI theme here, so that it makes it easier for me on the font colors later. The last thing here, when I get to 100, I need to flip all these to number. When I get to 100, I can just choose an arbitrary value here that's greater than 100. And then I'll have the darkest color here for that. And it's based on the sum of coverage that was there by default. I've got my rule set defined where the lesser value has the lighter color, and then it gradually gets darker. And greater than, equal to, less than, all matches up, number all matches up. So one way to do it in terms of meeting those requirements. Now I've got the basics down here. What I don't have right now is a very visible number for some of these darker colors. And so in the requirements, one of the things that we need to do now is add additional conditional formatting for font color. We want the numbers to actually be visible or more visible, and this is a contrast problem. So I've got black text on a dark background. And from an accessibility standpoint, there is a contrast checker that I have put out in the requirements here. It's just contrastchecker.com. And what this allows you to do is measure the contrast for something like foreground and background colors. And then the only thing that I need to pass for this requirement is this AA step. So you can dig deeper into the WCAG and the guidelines there, but just at face value, I'm just trying to pass this AA and make this green. And I have constraints where I can only use a black, which is this zeros, as my hex color, or white, which is all Fs for my color. And you can see when I flip white on white, everything fails, right? So I switch back over to Power BI, and in this case, I can see that I've got this dark color here. And one of the tricks that I could potentially do, if I expand visualizations back out, is anytime I have a color in Power BI, I can go to something like conditional formatting, background color, and come back in to look at my palette. I can just hover over here, and it gives me this hex value, this 6-character after the pound symbol or hashtag. It's going to give me this set of characters, and that's my color. And I can translate that and say, for instance, is my darker color this 094780, that's going to be my background, is that an appropriate contrast? And so what I can do is 094780, and I can see that it passes on white. So if I build a color rule that considers black and white, I'd want to make sure that when I'm using this background color, that everything lines up contrast-wise, and so I'd use white for 100 in this case. And I'm going to cheat a little bit for the purpose of the video, setting my font color now, similar to how we had done it with background color. I come into conditional formatting, choose font color, and once again, I'm going to construct rules. And based on my color selection, I already happen to know that 75 is the point that the white and the black font match up well with the background colors. So you might have to basically look at and do a little bit of digging through contrast checker yourself if you use alternative color selections. But for me, I can say if it's going to be an ice coverage value from 0 to 75, that will be, 0 to less than 75, that will be black. And now I can select a new rule and say if it's greater than or equal to 75, and I do want to be careful to make sure these are numbers and not percents, and less than or equal to 100, now I want it to be white. And when I was first setting this up, I was actually checking those contrasts on Contrast Checker just to make sure that everything lined up. You might be doing that if you chose your own colors, but for my particular set of background colors, this will give me appropriate contrast that will pass that AA check for the accessibility guidelines. And you can see here, lighter color blues, still black, darker color blue, now I get the white font color. Last thing I want to do here is come in and add the icon whenever the total coverage on the lake is 100. So in 1996, for instance, Lake Erie and Lake Superior both froze over. And then earlier on, 1978 and 1979, Lake Erie also froze over. It's not very common that these lakes freeze over. And one of the cool aspects that you might learn if you don't live near the Great Lakes and don't experience our winter is that a lake like Ontario, which is actually the smallest lake in terms of surface area, never freezes over even close. Like it's so deep that it's able to trap heat effectively. So even though it's a small lake in terms of surface area, there's a lot of water volume there. Whereas somebody like Lake Erie might be similar in terms of surface area to Lake Ontario, but the maximum depth on Lake Erie is something like 200 feet, as opposed to something like 900 and some feet for Lake Ontario. So Lake Erie is a very shallow lake. So that's why we see all these 90s for Lake Erie, because it's more likely to get close to freezing over every year. So a bit of an aside there, but what I want to do is come into color formatting, or sorry, conditional formatting, choose icons now, and I'm going to get rid of these additional rules. And the only thing that I need to pay attention to now is if it's 100, flip it to number, and if it's less than some arbitrary number that's greater than 100, then I simply want to add a star next to my value. And one of the things that I had done in my sample, just to be a little bit tricky as well, is there's this icon layout. Left of data is the default. I switched it to right of data. So if you really want to get 100% on the challenge and replicate this matrix exactly, you'd want to choose the right of data option as well. But that's it. That created the matrix for you, and it's something where it's really just kind of fleshing out additional visuals that you could then add. And I'll simply pull over the sample here because the only requirement for this challenge is just add the additional visuals. So it's up to your discretion, however you want to do that. The main thing for the challenge is simply replicate this matrix to the best of your ability and just be creative. Feel free to create additional visuals. It's a bit challenging because there's only 3 fields, but one of the things that I chose to do is obviously add this slicer where I can filter down the year. I added a line chart for average coverage by year. And what this allows me to do, if I blend that with this analytics option here, is I can add this trend line. And it's this dotted black line that shows that ice coverage over the past 50 years or so is declining overall. So obviously there's a lot of variation year to year, but the overall trend is decline. And then a bar chart here just showing the maximum historical coverage by lake. Erie's hit 100, Superior's hit 100. Huron, Michigan, and Ontario have never frozen over, although Huron and Michigan have gotten somewhere close. And then, as I mentioned, Ontario, it's so deep, even though it's such a small surface area, not likely to freeze over anytime soon. So good luck on your challenge this week. Thanks, everyone.